Next is basically an entirely separate framework, and it builds upon React. You think of it as like React++. It's almost like what TypeScript is to JavaScript.
You can define back-end code, and you can write it in the same code that your front-end code is, like lives. It's kind of mad.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Coder Career Podcast with myself, Cameron Blackwood. I'm a former technical recruiter and current software engineer, and as always, I am joined by my co-founder.
Hi everyone, I'm Colin Riddell. I'm an experienced engineer and former instructor.
So if you're not already familiar, the Coder Career is a technology careers network for you to be able to level up and find your next amazing role in tech and stand out in our wonderful industry. So in the last episode, we discussed React, which is by far the biggest JavaScript library out there. Please do have a listen to that last episode, which was episode number 44. Unless you're already really familiar with React, we really suggest you go back and have a listen. In this episode, ironically, up next, we are talking about NextJS and SSR, which stands for server-side rendering. But before we get into that, I think it's probably a good idea if we give you some background into the drawbacks of React, which is great, but there are some drawbacks. So, Colin, do you want to go through that and present maybe why this presents an opportunity?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So the last episode, the React episode, we were talking about all of the great things about React, and basically React is entirely client-side rendered. What that means is that if you take like a traditional web application to compare it to, uses pure HTML. It'll load HTML from the server into the client browser. The browser will parse it. It'll create this thing called the DOM that we talked about in the last episode as well, the document object model. But in React, there's no HTML that's ever sent over the wires except from a tiny little bit, in like in a pure React application. So instead, what happens with React is it's entirely JavaScript. It's an entirely JavaScript thing that's sent across the wire. When you make a request to a site that uses JavaScript, it downloads what we call a bundle of JavaScript. It's like a bunch of compiled, highly optimized, and highly optimized and obfuscated JavaScript code. And then it loads that. The browser loads that. And the browser makes this thing like a fake DOM. We talked about in the last episode. It's called a virtual DOM, and it makes it look like that page. It renders the stuff to the page in such a way that it makes it look like it's HTML, but it's not. So because of that, then there are some downsides. So think about it like this: if we were to write a script to scrape some HTML on our server, but our server doesn't return any actual HTML, then we can't get anything from that. If it returns some JavaScript, then the thing that's reading that needs to know how to run JavaScript. Most scrapers and search engines don't. So as a result, that means that we're not going to be able to know what that page says. So this makes pure React applications very bad for search engine optimization, which obviously is a really big commercial. It's a really big commercial thing to be able to have when you build an application or a website of some kind, to be able to make it searchable on the internet. And that's actually a really important distinction to make. And I've met many engineers, that even ones that are quite experienced, that have built things in pure React and then not realized that actually this isn't going to be easily just found on the internet in the same way that if you just wrote some HTML and stuck it on a server. So your search engine isn't going to pick up anything. It's only going to pick up things like data, text, paragraphs, links. Links are particularly good for search engines. But if it can't get any of those, then it's no use to us.
at the end of the day, a website can look as nice as you want, but if nobody's finding it, then there's only so many people ever going to come through a direct link through marketing, and SEO and search engines is not going anywhere fast. So it's definitely one of those things people have to keep in mind. And I think as developers, um, I don't know, maybe if I think this way particularly because I come from the commercial background originally, but I think sometimes developers tend to neglect the commercial side, and SEO is just so important, which really brings us on to like SSR and Next.js, which we're mainly going to focus on this episode. There are other things out there like Remix, which is obviously got quite a bit of heat behind it. I'm quite a big fan, as I'll go into later, but we'll mainly talk about Next, I think. And so Next is basically an entirely separate framework, and it builds upon React. You think of it as like React plus plus. It's almost like what TypeScript is to JavaScript. Yeah, it's not like you're learning a whole brand new language or anything like that. It's not a competitor to React. All it does is just add on top of what React does already. So it adds on something called server-side rendering, or SSR, which you may have heard before. So it's built and maintained by Vercel, who obviously are a major Silicon Valley company, and you probably would have used their products at some point if you've ever coded, whether you've realized that or not. They control a lot of all the grisly stuff underneath the browser. A lot of that is them. Nearly everything React can do in general, though, Next can do. So it's a pretty exciting prospect. I mean, if you were to give me some of the like major selling points or the headlines of Next, Colin, what would you say?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. So the big thing that we need to talk about, and the big takeaway from this episode, I mean, this is like a what really is episode, so we're really trying to like hopefully simplify these concepts as much as possible. And when we're simplifying concepts, I want to try and highlight takeaways. The takeaways are, what does Next give us that React doesn't? And that is, the answer to that is SSR. And then we want to really try and give people a good understanding of what SSR, server side rendering, means, how it can be used, and what it really is. Because I remember when I first came across Next, like I think I had a bit of an understanding of what SSR meant, but I found it really quite confusing, and I was a bit miffed. So I'm pretty sure that if I was confused, there's going to be a ton of people out there that are they're a bit they're a bit confused as well. And yeah, like a hands up in the air and admitting that I was a bit miffed. So um the big thing about that we want to take away here is that um is React is client only and there's no server side, and Next is client and server side. Okay, so Next has when we run a Next app, it runs a backend for us as well.
Yeah, it's a full stack web
Um,
application.
it's a full stack web application. Yeah, that's the cool thing about it, right? And it could almost be considered a framework. I think it probably is considered a framework because it's given you a bunch of stuff there. So, for example, you can define pages. So, a page in Next is kind of like what you would get if you had a React app and you added React Router to it. Now, if you think back to how you do it in React, there's tons of different ways of adding page routing to React, but with Next you could do that if you wanted, but ultimately they've built that in.
It's much more performant than likely anything someone would implement, particularly a beginner by themselves. So it's one of those things that it does a lot of that heavy lifting for you. And I don't think anyone's ever enjoyed manually listing out a load of stuff on React Router. So it's just handy to have that, and you can literally just create the directories, and it adds like nested routes and that kind of thing. It is, once it clicks for you, it's one of those things. It's like, wow, why doesn't like create React app work this way? Because it is quite something.
Yeah, it's really good. And I guess like one of the things about Next, and I didn't really plan on saying this, but it's kind of almost brings back a traditional way of building applications. And I'll talk more about that when we have a bit more of a sense of it. But React, for example, is very much a, it's not dead. It's still very much alive. It's
Very
not.
much not dead.
Yeah, yeah. And we want to make sure people understand that we're not saying down with React, up with Next. I mean, they're so incredible.
Yeah, you
Integral
need to
that it's,
learn React to learn Next. There's
yeah,
no two
yeah,
ways
yeah,
about it.
yeah, yeah. And that's quite important because I think a lot in this industry can be this is a new framework. Use this, don't use that. And that's not the case because you can't actually have Next without React, as we'll hopefully be able to describe. Um, but yeah, like the big differences are that you can write these pages, and when you define a page, you've got some options, right? The first option is you can you can have it render client side, and what that means is you can just say treat this as a React component, and it'll render it like it'll just make it JavaScript, and it'll
Mhm.
JavaScript will build like a what looks like a UI. Or you can say, um, I want to render it statically. And what that means is, and we'll talk more about that, but very in quick summary, it means that when you build the project, it'll like precompile that component and it'll render it server side and statically. And it means that it's only built once, and then when it's returned to the browser, it's returned pure HTML. Or you can do it server side, but when the page is requested. So just break that down again. We can either do static site generation for a page, we can do server side rendering for a page, or we can do client side rendering for a page, which is very much just your like original React, offering. If that makes sort of sense. The final, the final cool thing. There's one more thing that next lets you do, and that is it lets you literally define a backend. So you can define backend code, and you can write it in the same code that your front end code is, like lives. It's kind of mad. There's one directory that you can put all your stuff in, and it's the slash pages slash API directory, and everything from the pages API directory is considered as the backend, and you can basically write your own backend, and it's very cool. It's like a bit mind blowing, but it's very cool.
Yeah, it really takes a while to get used to it. It's like, wait, is this actually the back end? And it's like, wow, this is, pardon the pun, but this really is the next level. It is quite something. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, whilst Next isn't the first one, isn't the only one to be doing this, it is by far the biggest player in the space. So if you're going to learn one, probably worth learning Next. Although Remix is around the corner.
Remix does seem pretty cool. I'm really keen to learn about a bit more about what Remix is from you at some point. So hopefully we can chat about that. The thing I was going to say as well is like I've been using Next properly for about a year now. Use it at work, and I still get quite confused as to like because the back end code and the front end code look like from when you're in your editor and you're in
Mm.
VS Code, it looks like it's
It all
one code
looks the
base.
same.
It
Yeah.
is it is one code base.
Yeah.
That one of the things that actually that Next does is when it makes the back end bundle, um, it makes it from the same code base as the front end bundle. So you can actually write, like for example, a type, right? You could create a type like I could create, and if I was like using TypeScript, I could create a type for like customer data, and then that customer data type can be used like on my front end code. I can use it in my React components like as I would normally, but I can also like use that on my back end code as well because it's the same code base, and they do this thing which I don't fully understand, but they do this thing. My understanding of it, albeit naive, is that they compile the code and make one bundle, which is like a compiled version of JavaScript for the back end, and then that gets sent. That goes runs to the back end, and then they make the bundle for the front end as they would normally. And you can make that from the same code. So if there's types that are shared, it just uses those. It's so cool, and that's really handy because you might want to like send something to make a request into your backend, and it used that same type, or it used one of those objects, or it's just really cool. Um, as I said, the big differences that we're going to talk about in this episode, the big takeaways are pages that are rendered statically, pages that are rendered server side on demand, and pages that are rendered client side. So let's go into the first one, pages that are rendered statically. Let's say we have a page that's just full of paragraphs of text, and it literally just is I've just written a bunch of text out, Like,
Maybe an about me section on a developer's personal website would be a good example of that.
yeah, yeah, you've just something that's like not going to change, and you don't need it to change. Um, it's just a bunch of static text. So we can use Next to say, take all that text and and what Next will do is it will compile it in a way that when we ask for it, when it's requested by the client, um, it can be requested immediately and it can be sent back immediately. And what happens is that's called static site generation, um, or rendered statically. So the way it works is I'll like write a file that has all that text in it, um, and I'll code. I can code it. As long as I'm not doing any like ifs, or if I'm not using anything that's dynamic, I can just write like a bunch of H1s and H2s and body tags and all the rest of it, and then it'll take that, even if it's got images in it, it'll take that, it'll compile it when I build the project to HTML that we can't see, and then it'll put that on the server. And just the same way an old school kind of server would. If you make like a web server and you stick an HTML file on it, it'll just serve that up. It kind of does that, but you can still write stuff in React. So it's important to know that when you're doing that, it's baked into the back end and when it's built and deployed. And then the rendering part, quote unquote, is it's site generation time. In other words, when you build your project. And it's really important to know that SSG, static site generation, is done when the project is built. That sort of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So for anyone that's maybe like unfamiliar with that, it's just literally when you run npm run build, and yeah, it basically just makes things ready for production, in layman's terms.
Yeah, exactly. So the next one we need to talk about is server side rendering, or rendered server side on demand. So let's say we've got an application where we're adding and removing articles, or like a blog, for example, or we're adding products to a shop, or we're doing anything where we're wanting to add and remove data to the back end of it in any way. Um, your static rendering won't work for that, and the reason it won't work is, if you think about it, if we've got a blog, well, you could argue that it would work for a blog, but depending on who's building it and what they want to do, if you're writing a blog article, or probably a better example, if you're adding an item to your shop, to your online store, then you don't want to have to rebuild the project and redeploy the project for every item you add. So if I, for example, have a trainer shop and add some new pairs of trainers to it, with static site generation, I would have to rebuild the entire project in order to add those, which is not useful for that, which is why we have SSR, server side rendering. So in that case, when a request comes in for a piece of data, we actually just say, run some server side rendering on the back end. And what it does is it'll grab the data from the database, or whatever it is you need it to do. Mostly it'll be a database call, or it could be like another fetch down to another service. And then it'll return that data, but then it'll turn that into HTML on the server side, and then send it back up to the client as HTML. So it'll look like it's being rendered on the it'll look like it's been rendered on the server through a normal HTML kind of request response, but you know, it it will actually be rendered on the server, uh, but it should be a little bit slower though. It won't be as quick as your static site generation, because if you think about it, that request is going to come into the server. The server is going to make a database query to get some of that data. It'll render it to HTML on the server side, and then send back that HTML. So the page is when we say rendered, what we mean is it's turned from React code into HTML code on the server side. and then the HTML code is sent back up.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, it's just extra logic, right? Which is why it takes longer. I mean, when you think about it, it kind of makes sense about why it would take a bit longer. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of major advantages to that. And honestly, like, I know we're supposed to be a bit neutral on this, although actually, are we? I
No.
think it's definitely worth that. It's definitely worth that trade off. And I think in general, there's a reason why you see enterprise companies very quickly moving towards things like Next.js and Remix. And it's not just because of the SEO; it's just because of how easy it is to develop with. And yeah, I mean, I guess if you're not persuaded already, I do just think if you're someone that knows how to code and React already, just give it a go with create Next app. Or Remix, create a Remix in it, and the Remix can be. Do you know what? I actually think Remix is a step up from Next.js.
Nice. All
Not to
right.
hijack next episode, but
Definitely not.
yeah, I do think Remix is a bit of a step up. I mean, how much do you know about it already?
I know nothing about Remix. Zero, zilch, nada. So I'd love to learn some.
Yeah, think about it like Next plus a load of functionality that's built in, and there's a number of different custom implementations that you can start it off with, and you can make your own custom implementations, which is what I'm doing at the
Okay.
moment.
Like
So yeah,
templates. Is it
yeah,
kind of
exactly like
right?
templates. That that
Okay.
that I think that's the terminology they use actually. So yeah, I'm making one at the moment for people to make their personal websites much easier. So there's a lot you can do with it, and it's got so much built in with like CI/CD stuff, just built in for you, a
Oh,
database built in for you. Like it's incredible. Like it is literally a engineering department in a repo.
that sounds quite cool. I genuinely didn't know that before. So it sounds quite a lot like you get like a lot of project I like to use, like completely tangential to this conversation. I use Spring Boot in the Java world, and there's a few projects that like, and Spring Boot does a lot for you. And there's a few projects that are quite that like take that even further and say, right, I want to just have essentially like a cookie cutter. Here's like a templated full stack application, and you're not really like you make even less decisions about what you need. Is that kind of what you're when you're going with it? Yeah.
In a way, yeah, but I would almost the best analogy with Remix I can think of off the top of my head would be imagine most tools, let's say in the context of golf, something is just a driver or it's just a 5 iron or it's just a putter, but actually with Remix you're given a whole golf bag full of all the clubs you need. And even better than that, if you decide that you prefer a certain club better than a club they by default provide for you, you can change the configuration really easily, pull that club out, put a new club in, depending on the course. So it is very impressive, and I genuinely think it could well be the future of web development, which is lofty words. So
Is it built entirely on top of Next.js then?
no, so it's not built on top of Next.js. I think it is
Oh,
just
okay.
it's just built on top of. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's just
React.
built on top of the React and Node. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
yeah. But I did read something about there being some kind of potential Deno or Dino
Yeah,
it being
Dino.
built on that runtime. But I don't think it is. I just think it was an idea that was kicked around a bit.
All right. That sounds pretty great.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely recommend people try it, and I'll open up my template soon once it is less horrible.
you've heard it here first. There's gonna be a nice template on GitHub at some point
I
soon.
wouldn't necessarily use the word nice, but let's see.
Excellent. So we've got pages that are rendered statically. We've explained that. That's your statically rendered pages that are just a bunch of text or images or both that is converted to HTML on the server at build time. Then we've got server side rendering, which is where text and images and all other UI things are rendered, which means converted from like React to HTML at request time, as well as a little bit of database stuff factored in in order to get the data. And then the final one is client side rendering, which we've already explained is that there's no HTML sent back at all, and actually it's just pure JavaScript.
Yeah,
And the awesome thing about Next, right, is the fact that you can easily use all three of those in your application, and you don't have to like it's like there's a difference between them of like one function. Um, and using all of those is really easy. In fact, the statically generated SSG part Next does automatically for you, right? So let's say that you wanted, in most cases anyway, let's say you just had a bunch of text in a React component, and you just wanted to, and if that whole page was entirely text and didn't have anything dynamic in it, like the compiler or like um, the bundler would look at that and go, right, how much of this do we know exists? Because as soon as you bring in something dynamic, for example, as soon as you make an API call, or as soon as you make like a fetch, so if you've got a React component, and then that React component has some regular static text in it, it'll be able to like SSG that no problem. If you then take that React component and then make what it renders conditional on a fetch. So, for example, rather than rendering a bunch of text, it renders a bunch of text, and then it also says, "Go and get this from this API," and then display that data too. At that point, it's not then going to not be able to do SSG, and the bundler should be able to like almost look through that and go, yeah, this looks good for SSG. Oh, actually, you've got a fetch. Can't do that, so I can't server side generate this page. So the SSG part happens for most pages automatically. There are some things you need to do if you, for example, want to SSG an entire set of routes. For example, if you've got a blog, so let's say you've got like mywebsite.com/blog/ and then like an article ID, you do need to do a little bit of configuration so that the SSG knows all of the potential routes, if that makes sense.
See, Remix, you don't have to do that.
Right. Oh, okay, cool. Does it do it for you? Oh,
You just
amazing.
add like a $sign. Yeah, it's very cool.
Right. Okay. So for the SSG, you have to do that. For the SSR, it's your $sign. It's in this case, it's like a little the little slug they call it. And then for the client side rendering, there's no you don't have to do anything. For example, if you've a good example of client side rendering is if you've got a component or you've got two components and one renders on a condition, and if it can't find out what that condition is at compile time, then it'll client side render it, and it'll make the fetch, satisfy the condition, then render the correct component. So that's pretty much it. Your summary is, just once more, because I know that it can be quite confusing. SSG is your stuff's rendered at build time, good for lots of static data. SSR is it's rendered at request time, so when the request comes in, and client side as we've discussed.
Cool. So hopefully people want to try some Next. I mean, there's plenty of resources out there. As we mentioned before, we're obviously partnered with Zero to Mastery, and they do have a good course on it there, and with React as well. So we have a discount code as well. If you follow the link in the description of the pod, then you'll get some money off, and we'll get a kickback, which is really, really appreciated. Because
what's the discount code again? Can you remember?
See, I thought it was Friends 10, but it didn't work for someone last week. So that is TBD, but it will be in the description, I promise. And we don't have some kind of like exclusive deal with them. Like, obviously, there's plenty for free on YouTube as well. Like, I just personally, I think Zero to Mastery is quite well taught, and obviously, kind of do your own research, see what you like, see how you like to learn. But if you do want to check them out, then just have a look in the description. But yeah, thanks again for tuning in for another episode of the Code of Career. If you want to get in touch with me, my Twitter is Cam Blackwood95. Code of Career's Twitter is the Code of Career. What about yourself, Colin?
My Twitter is Colin_Riddell. I'm also on LinkedIn, Colin John Riddell. Please have a wee follow. It'd be good to catch up with some folk. We also have thecodercareer.com, and we've got a great Discord with lots of people chatting about lots of cool stuff. You can join the Discord via the website, thecodercareer.com/discord.
Yeah, and all those links are in the description, and obviously just contact either of us through any of those means if you have any questions about what we do, or if you're a business looking to partner with us. But thanks again, listeners, for another episode of The Coder Career. Have a great week and happy coding.